Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Brandon Gibson. I'm the managing director for Marble City Opera, and we have a special treat for you this evening. Today, I'm joined by the composer for the commission that we have upcoming that you've heard so much about so far, I Can't Breathe. Allow me to welcome and introduce Mr. Leslie Burrs. Leslie, how are you this evening?
I'm doing very well and very happy to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. Very thrilled to have you collaborating with us on this piece. There's no one else that I could think of that I would want to have, scoring my words and helping us to tell this message really, because that's the most important thing with this project. So I guess if you will, just take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself. Tell us, your background. I know all that stuff, but tell all of our people watching at home.
Sure. Um, Here's how my background works. I started out as a flutist, and I am a flutist, and that's what I always imagined I'd be. But I was also always interested in jazz as a teenager in particular. Charles Lloyd was my great
Okay.
influence, and Yusef Lateef, amongst others. And so I always imagined that I was going to be a flutist. But ironically, while I was doing that, I had grown up singing in a boys' choir and
Mhm.
ultimately in a professional men and boys' choir where I was 10 and I was getting paid to sing in a choir. And I'm saying all that just to give you a perspective that even though I thought I was going to be an instrumentalist, um, I was amazed at hearing these choral works and hearing works in varying settings. And I was also, at the time, originally a trombone player, so I was
Really?
doing that. And then, oh yeah, I was a trombone player to the extent that I went to the University of the Arts as a trombone major. But
Wow. Okay.
I was playing saxophone and flute. And I say I was playing saxophone, but I think I didn't realize I was not really playing saxophone. I was not that. It allowed me to be in front of a band and it allowed me to have the girls look at me for a minute and say, "Oh, I like that saxophone player." So I was playing flute as well, and after I got into college and having these experiences in playing in chamber ensembles, singing in choirs, playing for musicals, and all of that, I realized how much all of that was influencing me at a given moment. And so I wanted to bring those experiences. And by being so interested in jazz, the one thing that was unique to jazz players is more times than not they were composers as well. So
Mhm.
that told me something. I said, okay, if I'm going to play this music, then maybe I should try to write the music as well. And then the church situation, the church choir situation, which was a very high Episcopalian, very wealthy church in the heart of Philadelphia, in Center City, Philly. They started by me growing up singing in their choir and becoming a male in the men's section as well. Um, they started giving me opportunities to write for them. And
Nice.
so all of a sudden, I started, my first aspiration was to write for a choir and then to write for a chamber ensemble. Then I said, well, I always enjoyed being in an orchestra, and so I think I can write for orchestra. And so an opportunity presented itself when I was an affiliate artist. That was an organization in New York, and I was traveling all around the country performing as a flutist. And so the Alabama Symphony approached me based on the residency that they saw me do somewhere and said, we'd like you to come and do a residency with us, but not in any other capacity but as an affiliate artist and as a flutist. And I said, I'll be happy to do it, but I want to write my own music for the orchestra too. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And they said, well, have you ever written for orchestra before? And I said, not really. But I went and took quick orchestration lessons with my friend at Haverford College, John Davison, they said, if you can demonstrate that you can do it, and that's what we'll do. And so that was my big first opportunity to do that. And what I'm saying all this to you is to show you how, because opera is the all-encompassing art form, right? And
Yes.
so my point being is, I started out as a aspiring jazz flutist in my head, and
Mhm.
then um, and then it elevated because of these varying life experiences musically and culturally. So then, from graduating from choir writing to chamber writing, then I said I want to do music, and so then from the orchestra music, I think I want to write an opera, and that's how that all came about for me. Just to give you a quick overview in terms of what I how I got to the point of potentially compose. So my first effort was I founded an organization called the Creative Artists Workshop,
Okay.
and and within that there was then it was called the Afro American Museum. That ultimately became the African American Museum in Philadelphia, and I learned to write grants. I learned to get funding, and so I said I'm going to write my first effort for writing an opera. It had a very unique title, very ingenious. It was called a Black Opera, and so but it was encompassing varying aspects of Black life at that time. This was in
Mhm.
and we were successful enough that we got funding from the National Endowment, and Livingston Biddle was the of Bailey Banks and Biddle family, and he
Mhm.
was the head of the NEA at the time, and they found it intriguing enough for my first effort, and believe me, it was more of a concert version of an effort
Right.
than an actual production. He actually was in attendance, and that was my first effort to write an opera, and it consisted of
Mhm.
primarily jazz musicians. But you know who sang one of the parts was Marietta Simpson, the
Really
not so. But at that time, she was a trombone major at Temple for, and so
love it.
Marietta performed one of the roles. Then she went on to become very famous and very successful. But the whole Simpson family were remarkable. Evelyn Simpson, her sister, Joy Simpson, they were just great musicians, and I was blessed to be in their company and for them to, meaning to know them just as friends and then have them involved. So, so that went on, and then my next opportunity came when Opera Columbus was looking for someone to write a new opera and so they did a national search, and ultimately I won that national search. And
Wow.
see, who who would you like if you had an opportunity to use to write the libretto? And so my most favorite author at the time, who I did not know originally, uh, was John A. Williams. And so I reached out to John A. Williams, and John said yes, he'd be interested. And so we went from there to create the opera Vanqui, Vanqui, Vanqui. And it won some awards. I won the Legacy Award from the National Opera Association for writing Vanqui. Um, Eartha Kitt was, for those that are old enough to know who Eartha Kitt is, sat
Perfect fit.
um, for multiple presentations because she was with the Disney and in a Disney production, and one of the board members knew her very well because his daughter was on Broadway with her, and so he extended an invitation, and they wanted to explore the possibilities of seeing if we could get Disney interested. So those were the kinds of things that were happening. So it was a very exciting and it was a great experience for me to then write a full-fledged opera. I had Benita Valente was in it. There's a very prominent soprano, but the most important, the lead and the star for that was Carmen Balthrop, singing the lead role of Vanqui. And Roderick Dixon premiered the role of the tenor. Roderick Dixon premiered the role of Prince, the other lead role. So
That's amazing.
Johnson. It was a good Brian Johnson, a baritone. So he's from Ohio. So
Okay.
so he was associated with Albert Columbus in that way too. So it was just a wonderful experience. It was just great. So
It really does. That's wonderful, mate.
I was just going to say Tazewell Thompson in the opera world was the director for that as well. All right, so now everybody knows my life story for the moment to get us to this point. Here we are.
No, no, no. That's amazing, and thank you for sharing all of that, all those experiences. I love how you started somewhere else, and kind of your life kind of led you to opera and to the point where you are now. And I can hear actually all of those elements in your work. I didn't know that you were a trombonist, or maybe I forgot it or something, but I can hear the affinity for brass and the jazz sensibilities, and just it makes sense also that you're a flautist because the attention to melody in your work, really it all makes sense. It's a small world too, because a lot of people don't know, but our executive artistic director, Catherine, also started college as a flute major.
Ah,
Realizing somebody, I think one of our teachers told her, hey, you can sing, right? And voila, there it is. But that's really fascinating. And I agree with you in that opera is really kind of the combination of all of the various performing art forms, even, the portrait arts and visual arts rather. And you really get to combine all of those elements. Um, I imagine that most people know my personal background, but personally, I maybe went a little in reverse and then circled back around. I started as a singer and started in opera, and then ended up doing a production of Big River at at my college campus, University of Tennessee, and I realized, oh, okay, these guys can sing too. In the voice department, we looked down a little bit on the theater folks and the musical theater actors, but when I was over there and saw them, putting in the work for 20 or 30 performances and still knocking it out of the park, I said, you know what? Let's take it down a notch. Opera singers, let's other people can do this too. And more importantly, I love the connection that the theater art form gave to people. And so I then started studying acting and did acting, Shakespeare, and musical theater for a while. And then they always say you kind of return to your first love. And after doing that for a while and some other things, then I circled back around and began doing opera again. And I grew up loving jazz. I was a big fan of Coltrane and
oh, yeah.
Dave Brubeck, and I was fascinated for years with Take Five, and I still am, and all of his interesting time signature. But grew up loving jazz, and I worked at the college radio station on campus, WULT, hosting their jazz shows for a long time. So felt kind of deeper in love with that, sitting in the basement of the communications building by myself, listening to that. But again, really brought me back to opera, and I do love how it lets you explore a little bit of everything.
I'm,
And
I'm
so towards that end, you coined a term for your work that you call urban classical. Talk
right.
to me a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, in again, in my process of being a performing artist and creative artist, um, the one thing that I kept encountering is if classical players were aware of my work and how they viewed it, they always viewed it as being jazz. If jazz artists saw my works, they always viewed me as being a classical player and not necessarily a jazz player.
Right.
And so, it got a little confusing for me personally because my sole intent with my life is to be um, an artist, just an
Right.
artist, right? That is incorporating every aspect of my life experiences. So my life
Mhm.
experiences, to be honest with you, I've never used a phrase to describe myself. I've never used the phrase jazz flutist, but people say that all the time because I'm improvising when there's elements of improvisation when I'm
Mhm.
playing. Even though I studied with John Warmer at the time when I was in college, and he was with the New York Symphony and Philharmonic, and so I was just thinking that I'm being this creative artist. I'm attempting to
Right.
make my statement as an artist, and so I realized, okay, I'm tired of people telling me what I am. I think I'll take the responsibility of defining myself, and I thought, yes, there's classical elements to what I'm doing, but everything is influenced by primarily, especially in my earlier years, from my South Philadelphia roots. And so there's a kind of rhythm that takes place in
Hmm.
South Philly, right? And it was a conglomerate, eclectic. It was just everything you ever wanted to imagine. Because on one side of 11th Street was the African American black side.
Hmm.
As soon as you crossed the street, it was the Italian American, and they were two different worlds, just crossing a street.
Right.
But there were rhythms to those two worlds, as well as everything else that I was doing. And then on top of that, in my description of my history, I'm going to South Philadelphia High School, and I'm playing in the jazz big band. I'm playing in the chamber ensembles, in the orchestra. So all of those things are impacting. And then going to St. Mark's to sing all this wonderful music, from Gregorian chant to music for stopwatch and tape recorder in the church.
Yeah.
So all of those things were just impacting on me in ways that, you know, I was taking it in, not realizing how much it was impacting until I needed to draw from that to create whatever I was in the process of creating. So,
Right.
it was a rhythm, and so the urban part for urban classical music comes from those rhythms of the street, right? And so those things, they stay with me all the time, and from the speech patterns of people I was around, particularly the black people. But then I'm going to the world of the Episcopalian Church, and hearing there's another rhythm there, and there's another
Hmm.
point of music and content and all. So those things become who I am. And
Right.
that gets then processed in a way that, I've always said, it's my subconscious is always taking care of my conscious world. So that's what's going. Those things were um, hiding out in my subconscious in ways until I'm saying I need this, and my brain says, "Oh, I got this for you." And it comes out and says, "Okay, you need this kind of approach to whatever it is that I'm attempting to write." And I'm very dependent on that, and I'm very trusting of that, you know?
Right. Right.
So the urban classical is, I'll just finish this off for you. The urban is the whole sense of lifestyle, right? And
Hmm.
Philly in particular, but then traveling around the country and to Europe and all that, playing, those things come into play, but everything emanates from South Philadelphia for me, okay?
Right.
And then the classical part is, I acknowledge the greatness of the classical players, and what they do. So when I write the music, I ask the classical players to be classical players. I don't ask them to try to be jazz players. And I ask the jazz players, they're going to excel at what they do, right?
Right.
And then we'll talk about this later, but you and I, in our preliminary discussions, I brought up the phrase or term. I'm constantly aware now when I'm writing for opera and for vocalists, it's required to have a hybrid
Right.
background and quality of performance. And we can expand on that a little later, but that's where the urban classical comes from. I've decided I'll define my own style of music, so that people sometimes have a little bit of a, what is the right word, where cynicism when they hear that I've coined a phrase. I have to just accept that because it is the bottom line for what it is that I'm doing. And I
Right.
expect that phrase to be the definitive statement of who I am. And so if they want to be cynical because they're in one world or they're in the other world, but they don't want to understand that uh, combination of all the worlds for me for what I've experienced and what I want to expose through my art. That's on them. But here's the definition for who I am: urban
Right.
classical
Right.
music.
That really and truly speaks to me, and I think we've spoken about this before, but kind of mirrors a lot of the experience that I had as a young musician growing into, a more mature one now. I found that, you couldn't exist solely in one world and be a complete person, that you had to kind of incorporate all of who you were. And also, just on a practical level, there are lots of gigs out there, and you kind of limit yourself, your potential as a performer, if you say, "Oh, I'm only going to do this one thing." And so, kind of similar to what you said, as I got out of school and started performing, I found myself Sometimes I was singing at an Episcopal church, singing high music, and sometimes I was in the opera, singing opera. Sometimes I had some jazz buddies who needed a vocalist to fill in, or a funk band or something, and they needed someone to fill in. And so, if you want to make some money as a singer, then sure, I can help you out. I can do this too. And I was able to incorporate, just all the parts of myself. I traveled a lot. I'm growing up as well, lived in various, places. And you're right in that, you get these different speech patterns in the different places that you live and the different cultures that you're around. I remember I went to middle school in Florida and lived on a, Navy base down there. And so I had friends who had been born on the military base in Guam or in the Philippines, or some from Germany, or, some from Norfolk and Virginia Beach, and just all these various places. And everybody talked a little differently, but then we were in Jacksonville, Florida, so they talked a little bit differently. And you kind of get all of that in kind of a melting pot, as they say about America in general. And all of that is a part of you. And I do think, as a complete artist, a person should bring all of that to their work. And so I
Right.
genuinely appreciate that about what you do.
So what you're describing and what I experienced and what I'm trying to live is the question becomes what could be more American, what could be more African American than
Exactly.
incorporating all the elements of what this wonderful society, even with its moments now, that what I Can't
Right.
Breathe is about, even with these difficulties, even with the um, uh, what is called insurrection, what was happening on the 6th of January,
Hmm.
this still, there's this embodiment of all these different uh, individual cultures, but if you allow it, you get to bring them, you get to have them represented in your art through who you
Yes.
are and what you know. You used the word funk. Funk is like really important to the quality of what there's a elements of any of my writing. Now I'm going to make it clear. This is my own personal definition of funk, but it's got to have a groove element to it. You know, not always, but it has to have that thing that you hold on to that grabs you and you want to go run with it, right?
Exactly.
So funk becomes a thing, and then as a flutist, and then singing in the choir, the whole linear thing is everything is melodic for me. Is a melody first. If you
Hmm.
describe, there's almost nothing that I write when it comes, particularly for voice or anything, any of my works, where it's not first written as a line, it's a line, and it's more times than not, I'm doing it on my flute first. So
Hmm.
these lines are developed on the flute, and then everything grows from the line. Everything comes from that for me as a writer and as a composer. So the lines get written, then the lines start telling me things. The lines start telling me, okay, you need this kind of color, you need this kind of texture, right? And
Right.
so then when lyrics and when text is involved, then the text is telling me you need this kind of line. And so then because of rhythm, like with your work as the librettist for I Can't Breathe, what's happening there is the way, which was so different than I've written three operas prior to I Can't Breathe, and with each it was John A. Williams. Jules Tosca is the librettist for my work Transition Sung Stories, and Barbara Chase Raboud, who's a very, very famous sculptor as well as the author of Sally Hemings, which is a very famous, and then she gave me permission to create an opera based on her book of poetry, Portrait of a Nude Woman as Cleopatra. So those are the three operas, but each of those were written by primarily poets or authors, right? So
Hmm.
what I found intriguing is when the libretto came via email to me from you, it was different because of your generation. You're considerably younger than the three previous librettists, and the way your libretto was written, it was written in a narrative form, is the way I look at it. And
Hmm.
so I found that really first challenging for me personally. It was like, man, can I pull this off? You know what I mean? Can I pull this off? Or do I have to smack Brandon for me writing? You know, and so I realized, okay, this is a little bit. alien to me stylistically because it's six. And the other thing was there's six scenes, right, that are
Mhm.
all for basically one individual per scene to
Mhm.
convey their storyline. With that seventh scene with the culmination of everything, right? So
Right.
when I looked at it, I said, man, how am I going to tackle this? How? So I had to find the rhythm in your voice as a writer. That was the first thing I had to do, was find your voice as a writer and the rhythm of your voice within the text, within the libretto.
Mhm.
And as soon as I understood that, it allowed me to jump in with a, set, a sense of trepidation but confidence at the same time. Okay, and
Right.
so what I had to do was I started I started throwing myself into the individual characters. Number one, and
Mhm.
so and we'll talk about the process in that, but just
Mhm.
the words themselves emanating from you, they allowed me to realize, okay, here's the rhythm here, and I literally say the words, say the lines out loud. Then I pretend basically if I'm back in South Philly and I'm listening, if it's a black kind of uh, um, uh, presentation of the text, then I'm going somewhere to South Philly, either to my home and my family or to my boys.
Right.
From my
Right.
boys from Pistol to to anybody. So that were impacting on me growing, and I'm starting to hear, okay, because your writing was bringing in the idea of this rhythm of a black life, right? And
Right.
so I could start hearing reflections. I could start hearing the the direction of the line for just one phrase or something. And
Mhm.
so then I would say that line out loud. Then I would think, would that be my grandmother? Would that be my mom saying that? Would that be one of my
Mhm.
boys saying it? Would it be my brother? Would it be my sister saying it? That kind of thing, right? And so then all of that starts to come into play. And so I'm then discovering the contour of the line,
Right.
or even an abbreviated phrase. Then that abbreviated phrase is a very staccato or stuttered kind of like boom. Here's I need to get these three words out, but they need to have an impact that are important to represent the inflection of how you would say the line, as
Mhm.
opposed to this is the term I always use, as opposed to assigning sound to a syllable. To me, there's a
Yes.
big difference. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So all of that comes in that came into play. That connected me to you, even though we had not met, right? But
Right.
but you were there on the page for every page, right? And then not only were you on the page, but my boys were on the page, right? Or my family
Right.
members were on the page because we had shared experiences, even though you were in a whole different part of the country.
Right.
So all came into play, and so I would say the lines, I would think about it, I would try to imagine a contour, then I'd go try to find it on my flute.
Right.
But what's been interesting for the first time in my life as an adult, I've never had this experience to this extent with this work, is that when I did Vanquis, Transition Song Stories, Portrait of a Nude Woman, um, I, I, I trusted only my flute and my mind. And what
Right.
I mean by that, when I needed a line, I go what I call it hunting. I go hunting for it on my flute,
Mhm.
right? I don't know why, and frankly I think it's because of the vast experiences I had leading up to I Can't Breathe, the opera here with your libretto. I started hearing the lines in my head, and I would only confirm the line by going to my flute. I can't tell you that's happened more than it's
Wow.
never prior to that. And I don't know why, but that's and it would be like kind of right on, at least for me as a writer. The audience will
Mhm.
tell us, how they react to it. But
Naturally.
that is exactly what happened. I was hearing lines more just saying, "Oh, the mother's going to, she's saying this to get her son up, or she's so fearful from this reason or that reason, So I could envision that, and it became because your writing was more narrative from my interpretation of it
Mhm.
that I wanted and understood that I needed to approach it that way, and so I could hear it in my head better than I ever did in the past. And
Right, right.
what was intriguing with approaching your music is the other librettists, they would always have, okay, the action's going here, the action will stop, here we go with the aria. Yours was straight narrative, and I had to identify the arias within the work. I hope that's cool for me to say that to you, but
Of course,
uh,
yeah.
so, and the way the narratives were written, I had to find key words to allow for refrains to happen,
Mhm.
key words that would allow for the listener, for the listener to have the opportunity to connect not just with the advancement of a storyline, but to settle down for a moment to catch up with the inner emotions of the character, right? And
Right.
so certain words that you created, wrote, I then decided they needed to be repeated one way or another. They
Mhm.
needed to become refrains. They needed to just stop and create, instead of forward motion with the music, create that moment of let's be together. Me as the performing artist, me as the character, with you as the witness.
Because there has to be that connection between artist and audience. Otherwise, why are you doing it at all, right?
That's right.
And
So
I think that serves as a really perfect segue to, I guess, talk about, the piece in general and the inspirations for that. And so we've been over it a bit in our descriptions of the piece to people, but to those who may be watching this for the first time, this project originated immediately following the tragic events that took place last spring. Uh, what was going on, what was happening in the world, particularly in relation to the George Floyd killing, Breonna Taylor killing, the Ahmaud Arbery killing, that all happened there back to back. And while she was having that experience of being upset, I was having a similar one because it was just so tragic and so seemed to happen so back to back to back that it was difficult to kind of separate them. And I remember I was having a conversation and I was disgusted because for a moment I forgot or I couldn't determine which of the killings we were discussing in that moment because they'd happened so back to back to back like that. And so, you know, being who we are in this company, being ones who always want to make relevant art, Catherine said, you know what, we got to perform something about this. But we looked around and there was no literature that we could find in the repertoire that spoke to this issue at all. And so Catherine, being the idea person that she is, said, you know what, there should be an opera about this. And she messaged me on Facebook and said, you know what, there should be an opera about this. And I'm really upset. I was like, you know what, you're right, there should be. And then she's like, glad you agreed. You want to write it? And I said, but, you know, I am a writer and I'm an essayist primarily, a poet when I feel like it, a storyteller all the time. And, given the subject matter and everything, I said, you know what, sure, I'll give it a go. Never done it before. And then immediately we made an announcement. And I said, wait, hold on. I wasn't going to announce it just yet. Give me a minute. But I'm glad that, she did, throw it out there and light the fire, kind of that spark this. And so before I sat down to write, I said, what? So what is this? We agreed that we wanted to do a structure like the one that you described that featured, various individual scenes and maybe, a group number at the end to bring it all together. And I said, you know what, I can work with that. And so from that, I sat down and I thought, beyond the obvious death and the reason behind the deaths, what is the true tragedy in all of these events? And it struck me that you have these people, these individuals who are going about their daily lives and are overcoming, you know, the universal problems that we all have in life, just that life throws at us in one. But then also, they're also having these individual experiences and facing these individual problems that are, endemic to Black people. And I said, the true tragedy is that they're fighting this, they're fighting that, overcoming this, overcoming that. And then this outside thing comes and ends their life needlessly. A misunderstanding based on a prejudice that someone has that is all the hope, all the experiences that they've been, bringing into that moment gone. And so I set about crafting these characters. And with each one, I kind of wanted to paint an individual portrait of this individual and give each one a backstory, each one an arc. From there, it kind of went to my training. We both talked about our life experiences and bringing that into our work. And so, and also our different trainings that we went through. So I thought of, okay, as an actor, what do I want? I want some backstory. I want an arc. I want something to do. As a poet, I said, okay, I want a meter. I want a rhythm. As an opera singer, I said, okay, I want something that I can sing. you know, uh, words that I can sing. Also, if I'm going to be singing by myself in the scene for X amount of minutes, I want something that I can remember. And so give me various points that I can hang my hat on throughout. And then as a storyteller, I said, okay, now I want to tell a story. I want each individual to tell a story that is more than bang, police bad, and bang, person dead. Has to be more than that. We're trying to tell something different, and we're trying to explore this. And so I also wanted to explore various defenses that come up whenever you talk about racism. People always say, oh, if they had been compliant, maybe they wouldn't have died, or maybe if they looked a certain way, they wouldn't have died, or if they had been respectful, maybe they wouldn't have died, or maybe if they had been doing this or that. And I wanted to show in the work that no, that's not the case. You have all of these various things, and it doesn't matter because the end result is the same in a lot of these cases. And so it's really touching to hear you talk about how you connected with the piece, because that was really something that I wanted to do with each of these stories that we're telling. Each of the characters is named after. They don't have an individual name, but they have an archetype that they're named after. A character type. And so I wanted to take that character type and twist it a little bit, because I feel like as Black people, we're too often portrayed just Johnny One Note as that archetype without, conveying the richness of our experience. We're not painted as fully formed human beings. And so that was important to me. I wanted each character to be fully formed with a history, with a future that you could see. And just when you think you can see that future and you understand it, that's when the racism, the police brutality intersects. And that to me is the true tragedy of the piece, of the reality that, that has gone on for too long in the country. And so it was really important to me to show all of that. And like I said, my first go at it, first attempt at doing a libretto. But I am pleased with how everything turned out. And I can't say enough how excited I am to have you working on the music.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I would then want to just make it clear that the libretto is an exceptionally well done piece of art, and it's the one thing that I've been very fortunate with the librettists that I've worked with in for the operas is the depth of meaning and function and purpose is always allows the libretto to stand, frankly, to stand on its own.
right,
And so yours is equal to any of the other three works that three operas that I've done now. And so, and having a great fortune to have worked with these very prominent writers. And so yours, these works, and ironically, it can work as a full opera production, or for all seven scenes in essence. But each scene stands alone, stands on its
right.
own, and so that has its own kind of tremendous merits. And lastly, I just want to say it was extremely inspirational and permitted me to comfortably find the vision for the music that needed to portray these varying emotional and the idea of backstory, and a backstory making a person. Well, this society always makes, and it's a convenient mistake to be made, is that black people need to prove that they're human or prove
Exactly.
that they need to live. When the irony is what is imposed on a black person to dehumanize them so that you never are allowed to see us for who and what we are.
Hmm.
More importantly, I don't even want to say it like that. For the reality of our absolute humanity, by the fact that we have to contend with obstacles the minute you step your foot, and now not even stepping foot out of the door, which the scene of the scholar is a perfect example. Just like the gentleman who Jean Jean who where he's sitting in his apartment. And the woman
Yeah.
comes and kills him because she's at the wrong apartment. So we can't even, we used to worry about stepping out and having concerns for do you get to come back home? But if
Right.
you're sitting in home, right? So all of that is reflected in the way that you've written these scenes, and they became inspirational and for me to know how to treat and to find music that is the individual character because I toyed with the idea that there would be this thread of a motivic idea between each
Hmm.
scene, but intuitively I went away from that. I didn't try to force it, and it didn't happen. So it might happen in the seventh scene, right, in the last
Hmm.
culminating thing. Oh, I'm certain it will there, but I found I had to give each, just like you did in the libretto, their own voice, their own motivic branding or relationship, right? So,
Right.
so that takes place with each scene and each individual that's being portrayed in that scene
It
musically.
was important to me in writing because as I envisioned the piece, I thought of different styles of music that I've encountered in my life and different styles that I enjoyed, but it kind of different styles of music that reflected different walks of life because it was important to me that this not just be a retelling of, you know, black people in an urban setting. No, this is happening across the country in different parts of, America. And so these are people from obviously different backgrounds. And
Right.
so I tried to write each character with a different voice that was specific to them, kind of with the idea that, okay, this character would listen to this type of music, would come from this type of background. And I communicated that to you when we first spoke. And before I forget, speaking of when we first spoke, I want to thank our board member, Dolores Ziegler,
Oh
who
yes.
is a professor at the University of Maryland, recommended you to us. And so thank you for that. And also for serving on our board. She's wonderful. But so in communicating that to you, I didn't even have to tell you what style of music I was thinking of for each character. I think for some of them I may have written it in, but you kind of instinctively selected, oh, okay, I hear it in the way that the words sound for this character or that character, and wrote the piece as that just instinctively. So it thrilled me that you were able to hear my voice just from my words in those situations. Talk a little bit about, you've touched on it a little bit, but how you heard the various melodies in your head before you wrote them down, and how that's kind of different from your usual compositional style and practice.
Well, my process was uh, one is one of the things that happens for me is whenever I start a day of practicing on flute, I practice varying exercises. But the first thing I do is there might be patterns like in the jazz where there's patterns that you would
Hmm.
play to play against chord changes, right? Chord
Hmm.
progressions. Okay. So I can't tell you how frequently this has happened, particularly in this project too. Is I would start the day as a flutist. I would start by um, improvising a line. It would be based on a pattern, maybe. Like one of the patterns, because ironically, this opera, in a certain way, is based on, originally, it was based on two major chords, right? But
Hmm.
because I was playing this pattern that goes against a dominant a 5/7 kind of chord, a dominant chord, right? And so you'd play this pattern of these two major chords. Like if you're on a D7 chord, you're going to improvise on that. You start on C, you do a C major chord, and then you go to the D major chord because they embody the essence of the dominant five, the
Right.
five chord, right? So and then I do different patterns. Like I might run them straight up and down, or the boobadi do da that kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
So invariably, the first piece, well, first what I did was I do that, and every morning something else, not every morning, but different mornings, I would start, and then a pattern would come that has nothing to do with the pattern I was setting out to do, and I'd say, wait, that might work as a piece. And
Right.
so I developed a book of motivic ideas specifically with the intent of using them for the opera. And I took your suggestions of what you thought musically could happen. And so I thought about that, but then a pattern would come to me. And so like, let's just say, when you and I were talking, I developed this set of motivic ideas, and then the next problem for me was, okay, how do I approach this from the beginning to the end? And I knew, no, I gotta go to find the guy that is um, most familiar to me. And
Mhm.
the characters consist of, one scene is the mother, the next scene is the athlete, the next scene is the thug, right? And then what do we have?
The scholar,
Then we have the scholar, right? And then the father.
the father,
So I'm literally laying in bed saying, man, who am I going to go after first to create this opera, right?
and then the other one, the lover, who is another female character.
Well, yeah, man, I got to leave that alone for a minute because that's, that's going to be the most well, not the most heart wrenching, but one of the most heart wrenching. Um, so laying there I'm saying, I think I want to go after the scholar. And I decided that because he had aspirations of being a jazz musician,
Mhm.
and he references uh, Charlie Parker and different things. And so I said, I think I'll go after him first because I'm going to attempt to write. I'm going to write some lines to reflect his energy. So the the pattern that I came up with. Let me just see how it goes. Um, and then he's sitting in his he's worried about his energy for trying to get to the elevator with his arms filled with stuff to move into his new
Right.
place. But he's black. He's in basically a white kind of building. He's sitting in his apartment. Can't believe after all that he's accomplished that he thought maybe he wouldn't have accomplished from
Mhm.
to get to his master's degree and to get the whole business degree and all that, and then he's sitting there saying, like home, sweet home, it ain't much, but it's mine.
Right.
It's based off of that energy of thinking in their home, sweet home, it ain't much, but it's mine. It's gonna be that kind of
Right.
thing, right? It's got this little blues element to it, this kind of jazz little feel to it, right? And then he just takes it home, sweet home, it's mine. It's like all of that happening, right? But then we know the backstory, and the backstory becomes he's trying to get into his own new apartment and get in an elevator, and I can't tell you how many times this has happened to me. Tazewell Thompson is a very famous opera director, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, we were doing Vanqui. We were going to our rehearsal for the production of Vanqui with Opera Columbus in
Mhm.
Columbus, Ohio. The two black men, I think very, good looking, we're cool, everybody.
Right.
We're like what you try to state in the whole opera I Can't Breathe is even though you conduct yourself in that manner, you're dressed in that manner, we get on the elevator with this one white woman, she panics like nobody's business and
Wow.
literally runs out of the elevator right before the doors close. I jumped out.
Wow.
I said, "Where you going, lady?" And the same thing happened to us when I had my band. And this band was consisted of players that travel all over the world,
Mhm.
playing with Grover Washington Jr., Al Jarreau, playing, oh man, who's Weather Report? Joe Zawinul. That's who these cats are. We get on an elevator in Massachusetts, in Boston, and we get on with an airline pilot. You know, he it's four black cats. We get on the thing, and we're just joking, laughing, being ourselves. Which these cats are the funniest people you could ever imagine being around.
Right.
He's there, and he walks off the elevator, and it's on the bottom floor where he's trying to go up. I just say, man, where are you going? Get back on this elevator.
Right.
On the elevator. That
Right.
insult us even. And he got back on the elevator. And so we have to go through that all the time. That woman certainly, I can still see her running down the, not running, fast walking, almost running.
Right.
I'm saying all to say the scholar and the way that you wrote that scene, he's just trying to add, his hands are filled with stuff that he's moving. He clearly, if nothing else, he cannot be a threat. His hands are filled.
Right.
So by the time he works his way to his apartment, gets to cool out for a minute, and going to have the luxury of ordering a pizza and drink some wine so that he can just and kick back.
Enjoy his space as we
And
talked
knowing
about
that
earlier.
going to hit the job at this major corporation where he's, all of his hard work got him to this moment. The corporation's
Right.
paying for his apartment. And so all of that's going on. Unbeknownst to him, the woman's called the police because he's just a black man where he ain't supposed to be. So, what says
Like I said, I wanted to reflect these microaggressions
exactly?
that happen in everyday life that do not define the characters, but are kind of put upon the characters
Put it upon.
by outside forces. And, their efforts to overcome them are then, stunted and literally, shot down by these instances of violence. And,
These are not
we have a bit of hope at the end, which I think is important as well. We wanted there to be, you know, hope and, a question at the end. It was important for, to leave the audience with something that was more than, oh, this is sad.
exactly.
No, you want to have a call to action, like this is happening, this has happened, this continues to happen.
That's
When will it stop happening? And so that was very important that
right.
it, that it ends like that. And again, I love how you've connected with that. Um, really, we've spoken, but we haven't spoken that much. You were really just able to get all of this from, the work, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, so that's right, the scholar. And it dawned on me while you were just saying what you're saying. These individuals can be, they literally will be anonymous, other than they have the right to have you killed. That's
Right,
you see that from any of the Karen moments, right? You
right,
know what I'm saying? So you can, but the message that is being conveyed and hopefully the people leave with is how unright is that? I don't even know if that's a word, but how unright is
I
it?
know what you mean. Yes,
So, how, but why is it so right that I can feel comfortable to call the police and say, you need to go kill this guy because he shouldn't even be in my apartment, even though,
building. Yes,
that's right, building, right,
yeah,
in my apartment building, right, because that is disruptive to my sense of what is natural, and this is unnatural, right?
yes.
So anyway, so what was what's also compelling with the writing for I Can't Breathe is with the scholar. His backstory becomes very, very interesting to the extent of how much, but it's reflected in almost every one of the scenes in different ways. The relationship with the individual as a human being to their mom and to their dad and to
Right,
their goal of helping to make the family, it becomes a core strength of who and what they are, where they pull their
right,
strength from, right? So that gets with the exception of the thug, and we can talk about that, but the thug becomes even, in a way, even more significant because of that. So anyway, the scholar, you go back and learn about his life, his interactions, and how he helps his mom,
Mhm.
how he gets through school, how he wants to attract girls by being something different than what he is, but he knows he better just be himself. You know,
Right.
so all of that, all of those intricacies, all of those nuances, all those things that allow you to become the human being that you are, get shot. You get shot, and it gets dispelled because you're just black. You know what I mean? It goes,
Exactly.
it gets taken away from you just because you're not supposed to be there. Even
And
when,
that speaks really to one of the goals that I had in my head. I said, you know what, we don't have enough fully formed Black stories, stories that are just centered from our perspective, that are more than drug dealer, or you spoke of the relationship of a couple of the characters to their families, that, there are plenty of Black people who come from fully formed families. I sometimes grow weary of those portrayals in the media where, oh, he had to come from a single parent home, or he had to, have been raised in the projects, or he had to have been, this or that. We are more than those stereotypes as, individuals.
I want to say, even when we are that single parent home, because I certainly came through that, there was no one ever stronger than my mother. And I
Yeah,
get every aspect of my standards, my criteria for how to live life, my strength in terms of how to be strong when people want to dismiss you. That all comes from my mom, you know.
yes,
And so that's the other thing. Once again, I show you how African Americans can, they have to adapt to adversity, right? They
yes.
adapt in different ways, man. And so it's really, really important to know that yes, there is this. How did you put it with the the full family thing happening, and then but even when it's the single parent, and that single parent could be a man as much as a woman, right?
Exactly.
All of those things, and then like the idea of, we're not told, we're encouraged how to conduct ourselves. And
Hmm.
again, more times than not, to conduct yourself in a way, they don't say because we think you're going to get killed by a policeman, but
Right.
this is the way society works. This is the way we want you to be aware of society. And so
Mhm.
you get all of those lessons. You get out in the street, and they mean nothing.
And it still fails you. Exactly. That speaks to the respectability politics,
Yeah.
theme that I had in mind, specifically for one of the characters. They tell you, by all means, just we are raised as Black people largely to carry ourselves in a certain way, to speak a certain way, to act a certain way in public, just so that things like this don't happen. But then they do. So then, where do you go from where do you go from there? Um, I think it's also important to note and bring to light that I wrote one character specifically for a Caucasian female, a white female, because I wanted to I wanted to explore and bring to light that there are many different sides to this issue. There are, many different stories that are impacted by these events. In that case, and those two, the character that she relates to is the only instance in the opera where there are two of the scenes that are interrelated. And I think it's important to me or it was important to me to show that there are also people left behind.
Right.
In the instance of the mother and in her as, a girlfriend or a spouse, you have, these lives that are ended, but then you also have these lives that are left behind,
That's right.
because a lot is made, rightfully so, of the loss of life. But then there's also the hole that that loss of life leaves in society in general. Every time, something like this happens, every time a life is ended needlessly, that life leaves a hole in that community, a hole in, various people's lives that is just multiplied each time it happens, to the detriment of society as a whole. And so I wanted to reflect that as well. And I do. I think it's important, and I love that this work is happening. I hate and regret the instances that inspired it, but I hope that from that and from this work in particular, that conversations can be spurred that will move us forward to a point where hopefully, operas like this or stories like this or conversations like this are irrelevant because it doesn't happen anymore.
That's right.
And that is the ultimate goal, to inspire change with this piece. And I'm grateful that you are part of this, that that Marble City Opera is an organization that believes in new works and wants to be on the cutting edge of art, and that and opera in general, specifically as our chosen art form, as something that we can use to affect change in the world. Because yes, you want art to be a mirror to society and to be, an impetus for, change in the world. But you also hope that eventually those issues are no longer there to be reflected. And ultimately, the hope that we refer to, and the hope and the change that we hope to inspire with this piece, hopefully eventually it's a moot point and we don't have to go through these things anymore.
That's right.
And so I believe we are right at the end of our time. Do you have anything else that you would like to say in general about this piece, or just about yourself? Anything before we wrap it up?
Just that I'm just looking forward to the next steps of the creation of this work, and any opportunity to have it presented to the public by Marble City. So I'm very excited to be associated with it all. And thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you. We are honored to have you. I can't wait to hear and see everything. We're looking forward to it. And just again, to everyone that is watching, we will premiere this in February of 2022, which I'm still wrapping my head around saying, 2021, but 2022. So we're a year out from the world premiere of this piece, but expect to hear more updates as we get further in the process and everything about the piece, and uh, get excited. We are excited to share with you. We hope that you are excited to see it. So again, thank you for joining me. Again, I'm Brandon Gibson, Managing Director for Marble City Opera and librettist for the piece I Can't Breathe. I've been joined today by the composer, the amazing Leslie Burrs, who is composing the piece.